Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's always lovely to come back to the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I've been coming here since I was a student in Delhi, and it's always lovely to come to a university which rarely ever stays out of the news. I used to be a journalist in a different lifetime, so to speak. So I'm always happy to come back here. I'm really happy to come to JNU with this book because I think one of the great lessons of any kind of learning is to put things in context. We learned that when we learned to become historians, or when we studied to become historians. We learned that when we were journalists. I learned that in the work that I do with the government and so on and so forth. Context is very important. And I think one of the great things that I wanted to achieve through this book is put Srila Prabhupada in context. In context of what, you would ask? Well, I believe, and I've been increasingly working on this theory, there is something called global Hinduism, which remains understudied. Global Hinduism is the idea that at a particular period of time in India's history, Hinduism, of course, which was born in India, began to sort of spread its word, its ideas around the world. And that process created a certain movement of ideas from the base of India around the world through various dramatis personae, so to speak. And in that journey, there are many critical characters, people who took what they believed were Hindu ideals, Hindu ideas, Hindu thoughts around the world. Swami Vivekananda, of course, is well known, and his work, many of us perhaps would know. Srila Prabhupada, as Swamiji just said, is better known around the world because Srila Prabhupada did not, for a long time in his life, we just heard that he only went to America on a cargo ship at the age of 69, 70. So he was really at the last stage of his life when he actually created this mass movement. He had tried to create something in India, and that hadn't quite worked in the way he wanted to, until he arrived in America. And he arrived in America, which was being torn apart by the anti-Vietnam War protests. In that era, in that context, Srila Prabhupada took the ideas of Gaudiya Vaishnavite thoughts and philosophies and was able to work, astonishingly, with the hippies of New York to build a global movement. Within a decade after he landed in America, Srila Prabhupada had spread the word of his movement in every continent, from Australia to Switzerland, from New York to London. There was not a single area in the world where ISKCON hadn't spread its centers, its word. And he had created this global movement of young people singing and dancing, and that's why my book is called Sing, Dance and Pray, taking, in fact, the message and the format, not just the message and the format of the Gaudiya Vaishnavite tradition started by Sri Chaitanya to the streets of the West. And Srila Prabhupada was able to do this in almost a miraculous way because he, and I argue in my book that he landed in America which perhaps was ready for such a message. If you read this book, you will realize Srila Prabhupada not only was a great spiritual master, but he also displayed a kind of what I would call a kind of radical compassion. He was quite stern with his early devotees. They were all hippies from New York. And he was their guide not only in recognizing the fact that the purpose of life was to attain divinity, and I recognize that there is a divine, and if you search for God, you will come closer and closer to God. And Srila Prabhupada says that's in his writing says that's the fundamental basis of all learning. He says, why do we need learning? We learn, we educate ourselves so that we go closer to God. Now, through this entire process, it might sound very esoteric, but Srila Prabhupada was actually guiding those young men and women away from a world that was deeply fractured. In my book, you will see there's a chapter called, which talks about the high of Krishna. Now, why were there posters set up at that time by ISKCON talking about the high of Krishna? Because many of the young people they were meeting and were talking to about faith and spirituality were actually drug addicts. And they were saying, and there's this wonderful phrase where they actually tell people, look, whatever intoxicants you're putting poison into your blood, my apologies, that high you always have to come down from. But the high that we offer you, which is the love of God, the love of Krishna, you never have to come down from that high. And to me, that's such a wonderful way of putting it. To me, it's also somebody who's innovating on the message, right? Depending on the audience. He is telling them the message in a way that they can understand, that they can comprehend, that appeals to them directly. Quite like the hundreds and thousands and millions of people Akshay Patra feeds today, because you have to begin by giving a hungry person food, right, before you talk to them about God. To those people in America, the way to get through to them and to make them understand the message was to tell them that you constantly seek this high, there is a better kind of high. Right? What an innovative way of putting a message. My apologies, my voice seems to have gone. In many parts of the world, Srila Prabhupada took a certain authenticity of Hinduism. He wasn't trying to dilute the message in any way. He took it, thank you so much, Suhani, very kind, thank you. He took the message exactly the way he saw it. So, he didn't go to America and say, you don't need to do the kirtan. He didn't go to America and say, you don't need to do Murti Puja. In fact, he taught Americans what the Vigraha really meant. My apologies, and why it was so powerful. He taught them how to set up the altar. He taught them how to do the process of puja. He taught them that you need to wash your hands and your body and your legs before you approached the Vigraha. He taught them you need to do the same thing before you approach food. Because all food is prasadam. It is first to be offered to the divine before you consume it yourself. In each of these, he taught the American hippies, that in the process of spirituality, celibacy is perhaps the best way. But if you cannot do that, it is much better to be faithful to one partner. Remember, this is an age where we are also hearing for the first time maybe, the rumor in a sense of AIDS. So you can see Srila Prabhupada bringing his message of love of God into the context where people really seek it because it speaks to them. And I think that's perhaps the best example of what a preacher can do. And Srila Prabhupada, therefore, among the people who have taken Hinduism global, Srila Prabhupada has the greatest impact and footprint. No one has done more for global Hinduism than Srila Prabhupada. He took it to every corner of the world. He took it to cultures who had no understanding of Hinduism. He took it unadulterated. I want to emphasize this point, because often when Hindu ideas are taken to other parts of the world, people tend to, rejig them a little bit. Srila Prabhupada never compromised on what, today we say rituals, right? Srila Prabhupada did not see them as rituals. He saw them as integral part of the way he approached the love of Krishna, the divine, right? And therefore, he never diluted. He didn't tell the hippies, all right, you joined my movement, but you don't have to do the puja. So in this unadulterated format, Srila Prabhupada, Lord Chaitanya said that one day in every town and village of the world, the name of Krishna would, ring out in song. And Srila Prabhupada's guru had told him that this is your destiny. You can speak very good English and write in English. You take the message around the world. So he took the message around the world in the best case scenario of following Indian tradition, where you always try and achieve what your guru tells you. So even at the age of 70, where most people would have retired after a lifetime of work, Srila Prabhupada chose to, go forth and fulfill what his guru had, asked him to do. So therefore, Srila Prabhupada is the beginning in a sense. And his work forms the core of more work that I hope to do now in trying to understand how Hinduism went global. What happened when it went global? What are the ideas it engaged with? How did it respond to different cultures? What were the answers it was seeking to provide, and what were the questions it was asked? So you should look at Sing, Dance and Pray really as not a culmination of a culminating work, but really the beginning of a journey in Krishna consciousness and in understanding global Hinduism. I'm very, very happy to have come to JNU.